Thank you so much, Julie, for being a part of this interview about inspired life. And the reason for inspired life is really to show people what it looks like, people that are living inspired. We all go through life and our challenges and traumas, but they're in the darkness. There's always gold. There's clues, and that allows for our inner light to spark and to come into our transformation. And I know that you've been through a lot, but focusing on what has transpired, what did you learn from the challenges that you've gone through in your childhood, in your life that led you to doing what you do? And I'd love to hear what is it that you're doing and what led you to spark that inspiration.
Okay. What am I doing and what led to that and the challenges, even going back to childhood? So the first thing that came to my mind, and I've said this a couple of times to people, is I'm like, thank goodness for art. Art has saved my life. And sometimes I'm like, what do I mean by art? I'm not a visual artist per se. I do photography, I do creative writing, I do what I call conceptual art, which is like creating experiences. I do dancing. I'd like to get back into performing. When I was a child, I was on stage. I also do what I call interior art, which is kind of like imaginal spaces inside. So art is a really broad term. And sometimes, like I say, art has saved my life because during challenges, if I don't go to that realm of magic, it's like life has withered. I have to go to that well of inspiration and creativity. It's just like it's nurturance. It's self-generating, regenerating power to tap into that. And it doesn't mean, because sometimes also art is associated with like paintings, or it's associated with like a product that is made. And I'm like, not always. Sometimes no one sees what I'm doing. And it's very personal to me. It's the feeling that's evoked in the process of the art. I was also a elementary educator for a long time, and I brought that kind of idea of facilitating an experience into program design. So, like, art is and literally art making. So, and the maker movement that came up, where you would just have like a challenge of like represent the concept of love, and here's a bunch of random materials, what can you come up with to create a representation? Ta-da, like within 10 minutes. And like that's just an art activity where you're just finding materials that are ordinary and then transforming them through an internal process to represent something important to you. And that's what I mean by it doesn't have to be like a big mural that you've been commissioned to paint. Like it can be that, but it doesn't have to be that. It doesn't mean you have to write a novel, though I have done so. It doesn't mean you have to be a poet, though I am. Like, so it's more the creative process that is enlivening, and it can be anything. There's just such a wide spectrum of it. So it's the feeling of the creative process that is marvelous, magical, transformative, empowering, enlivening. And it can look like so many things and has looked like so many things.
Yeah.
And so that's kind of how I would answer that. I could get into specifics, but yeah, it's the feeling of it. Um,
So what I'm hearing from what you're sharing, it's very powerful in the sense of in your darkest times, you've turned to art, you've turned to that creative space to as an outlet and also for it to inform you. And I love, what you said about with the children in elementary school. Here's some props. Now express love through it. So what would love look like through the materials that you have? And it's interesting how we will shift into putting in form an expression that is hard to communicate. Or, and I see that your journaling or your art being the form to it's the action to inform you of what could be different, a different perspective. And I don't know, I sense that it's like a healing tool, would you say?
Oh, absolutely. And it transforms you out of a frame of thinking and into a place of kind of like playfulness or uh, joyfulness, even inquiry, curiosity, which is a very opening energy. So, whenever you feel trapped or locked or loaded or in some kind of mind cycle, or you're just feeling trapped by circumstances, you can then shift that energy, and it just takes you into a whole other sense of possibility, because then creative possibility is open to you and feels endless. Like that's where you just can transform your energy. So again, it doesn't have to, it almost doesn't matter what it is. It is this process of entering into inquiry, curiosity. It's like you suddenly become curious when you enter a state of curiosity. That is a very different way of being. And also, it may be temporary. Like sometimes you go into cycles of things, and sometimes the artfulness, I'm calling it art, but it really is a transformative state. Like you are transcending something. You again, I keep going back to curiosity, joy, openness, sense of ease, flow state. Like you step into that stream, and that is what enlivens you and gives you some energy back so that can sustain you. uh I keep calling it nutritious. Like it's like nutrition that then helps you move on. And I feel that I have been blessed in many ways to be able to still have access points to that. I feel like a lot of people are trained as they grow up to lose that and enter a really logical, rational state of mind. And playfulness does not come easy. Moving the body uh, in an expressive way, right? And dance, like, does not necessarily come easy to adults. It comes a lot easier to children. But as they grow older, you can see how that artfulness, I don't know, gets more, the expectations shift a little about what is considered childish. Like to spend time, if I was like wanting to just be like, okay, I'm going to go grab some random things around my house and I'm going to just make a piece and see what arises. You're entering also into kind of like symbolic language. And so it's not the same as trying to think things through. Your brain is trying to communicate in a different method, which is, again, deeply generative. You can get great insights and great things when you're trying to kind of come at things from a different perspective. And so it can be kind of like a symbolic language. But anyways, if I'm like, I'm going to just take a concept that I'm grappling with, um, and then I might say, okay, I'm going to give myself 2 minutes, grab a bunch of random materials and just see what I make, and then try and interpret that, because there's also an interpretive piece to what you might have made, and be like, what am I trying to say to myself? So it does have a therapeutic personal inquiry. It does not always have to be outward expression. Sometimes we think art is made for other people, and it can be, but it can also be made for yourself. So again, I'm finding myself coming back to process, and some projects, that's the only thing I want to do with it. But some of the things might go through like a design process where you're like, okay, I love this. This has happened. This time I'm going to go back and repeat it and build on it and build on it and build on it, which is often what happens in writing. We do a piece, we go back, we rewrite it, re-edit, revise, but that can come through in all kinds of things that you want to make. And making isn't just meant for, the traditional arts. Like I think like entrepreneurship is the type of making. There's a lot of ways we are making relationships, we are making, right? Like there's a lot of making going on. And so there's a lot of ways to come at it. There's a plurality of ways to come at it when you start broadening this aspect of an artful point of view. So sometimes you can be in this very painful emotional state, express that emotion out in other ways, can can just give you many, many more perspectives on what you are experiencing, which is
Yeah.
another thing I really love about it.
What I'm really getting from what you're expressing is that we've been living in thinking a certain way. We're really utilizing our left brain. It's very analytical. It's very much looking at the world around us, the form, so that we feel, in charge, that, the world around us is real and predictable. And sometimes it when we're in our mind analyzing certain things, trying to find solutions to our problems, sometimes we get stuck. And then you said, in order to allow the flow to happen again, it's almost like shifting into a different part of our brain. So the right brain into the creative, allowing the flow, the play. And what you said is it's a whole other language. It's a language of symbols. It's almost like the this new language where it's foreign to us. We haven't really, like, arts has been appreciated, but also um, kept suppressed for a long time. But now it's more than us. It's we're utilizing all of this creative work to be able to shift. And I love how you described everything and how you've used it with the children and how you continuously use it with yourself. Now, what inspired you to, like, what's the inspiration um that has you, do you share this work with others?
It's yeah, see, that's where again it's a spectrum of, so there's some things that are very internal and personal that I wouldn't, but then there are things that I have shared. And then there are things that I have so if I go back in my history, I go back to kind of like my childhood. So I born in the 70s. I was again blessed with this group of friends, and we would like put on pretend plays, and we I remember us pretending to build a roller coaster out of rocks, like just like pretend. We often took fairy tales and acted them out, like, so we were gravitating. I had this close group, and that went through, and then I get into elementary school and I'm performing in plays, and I actually contributed to a play. I had a sense of safety during those times. We put on dances. I remember we made a choreograph to the song Fame. We did that in the gym. So there's something about the exuberance of childhood, that there is an allowance for play, mistake making, because that's part of play. Like, it doesn't have to turn out this perfect. It doesn't have to turn out perfect. You're meant to kind of experiment, play, be silly. And then there's a point where that kind of stops a little bit. There's a self-consciousness, and a couple of other things too. But and then it becomes, there's a shyness that develops, and then then I turn into a writer. So I kind of take things less expressive and they become more internal. I become a journal person. In my teens, I'm putting a lot of expression into paper. I'm writing creatively. I am, of course, also absorbing a lot of creativity. I'm absorbing books. I'm absorbing film. The pop culture that we live in is also incredibly artistic. We're living in very highly visual medium. So we're always ingesting symbolism all the time. But that's kind of, yeah. So I was always writing, and then I would have a group of, I would join a writers group. So community is also important. Like, I've always tapped into connections, but sometimes I've had to go it alone. And then sometimes I choose to go alone. So there's like degrees. It's like art is out this, I call it art, but I kind of mean something different. It's kind of a feeling, but it can be done with people. It can be done alone. It can be produce a product. So for instance, I have self-published novels. I have self-published poetry. It can be done solo, like I go and I like to take photographs of nature. That when I had a medical situation where I had a head injury, and that was where it made it very clear to me that if I was going to regroup and survive, I needed some kind of artistic connection. And I would go to like a corner of the road and have curiosity about what was there and like do these close-up photographs of just like what was there living with me. So the curiosity got me through that, and then I would post them on social media and just be like, here. So like there is a little bit of publishing, but really it's the process of me engaging in the world again and seeing it again. It's and I would be absorbed. The feeling is so great, this of being absorbed and in flow and connected, even in just that smallest way, which you could do with an iPhone. You could do it right now. You could get up and just start looking at your environment and being curious about something. Like go back to the same, everything changes. So go look out your window. It's going to change every day. It seems like it's ordinary and dull, but it's not. There's going to be perhaps like a spider making a web in a corner one day, or there's going to be birds passing by. Like capture that with your camera. Be curious about where you are. So yeah, I feel like I got off track there answering your question, but you could see that it doesn't have to be a singular form of art. It doesn't have to be a particular product that you sell, though it could. It could have one be alive for one time and that's all that's needed, or it could be something that you do repetitiously on repetition as a practice. Like those photographs became a kind of spiritual practice, a daily habit of just needing to connect and engage and dive into the flow, which also journaling could be, writing poems could be. There's just so many ways in. Also dancing and movement, expression through movement. So there's just so many entry points for people once you start realizing that this whole area of life is live for you, accessible to you at any point in time through any means that suits you. Yeah, but sometimes there were times where I forgot that it existed, and then I had to tap into it again. And that is when I say art saved my life. It's when I like punctured the veil and was like, oh, remember that this whole way of living exists. So
Yeah,
yeah.
I really hear a few things that you said is um, when life catches up, it's acknowledging that there's a source of infinite potential or wisdom that when you tap into it and allow it to flow, um, then it guides you through a process of clarity, shall I say? I don't know. But what instigated, and you said this a couple of times, is it starts with curiosity. And then and then through the curiosity, there's the flow. It's like tapping into something. And then it's the process of discovering.
Yes, because you don't, that's where the fixation with perfection or an end product can sometimes limit you because it is a process of discovery. So it's an open, I'm doing this gesture. Oh, opening to something rather than trying to pinpoint something. Like that might come through circling around it. It doesn't take this linear process that we often think is necessary. It can be circular. So I feel sometimes that's the resistance is but that's because we're expecting product or we're expecting, I don't know, finality, or we're expecting perfection, or we're expecting some pinpointed experience to come from this. But it's rather instead like a way of living. It's a shift in consciousness, I'd almost say, or a shift in perspective for instance, to go to your window that you've been looking at all the time. Like I used to go out and be like, I've been outside and seen this particular corner of land so many times. It probably won't show me anything new. And then I would get out there and I'd be like, oh my goodness, today I got really into, for instance, blue shadows on snow from the trees. And I was like, look at the color, you know, this color is amazing. And then I would trip out over the color. And that has happened, or I'd be like, there'll be nothing. And then I'll see this leaf that has fallen and the sun is shining so that it is glowing red. And I'd be like, oh my God, look at the glowing red. Like it would just shift something in me. So I would have presumptions and then I would get into it and realize that those presumptions are actually not correct. And so the discovery is part of the fun. And that is part of the playfulness. And then also part of the result. You can't predict the unpredictability. I think that's, so it can be a little uncomfortable, but to me, it's so joyously fun that the unpredictability, the scariness of that doesn't bother me. But I could see how, and I could see this sometimes in my students. If you're not feeling, I don't know if it's about safety because it, but if your self-consciousness is blocking you, it can be hard to access that, which is why maybe sometimes it's best to do it privately. But also if you can find a good community that can help draw that out of you and you're in a non-judgmental atmosphere, which is what happened for me in some movement-based activities where I'm like, oh, I actually feel like I can move my body in ways that I don't feel self-conscious. That's also great. So again, there's multiple entry points to do it. You could start alone, or you could find groups that support you and test them out. But you don't know what's going to come from it. So maybe something really marvelous and magnificent and long lasting and perhaps financially supportive comes from it. But also maybe it's just something that is very nurturing to you. That's also a form of abundance. Abundance doesn't always come just through money. It comes through experience. When I would go out and tap into the color of that leaf, I felt like I was just living the most abundant life because how rewarding was that? It was so gorgeous. So when you're feeling like gorgeousness, you're like, that's value and worth. And look at this gorgeous earth. Like, so again, it would become this sort of daily spiritual practice in a way.
Yeah, I really love the your expression and the depth of what you just shared there, the gorgeousness when you see something beautiful and how it transformed how you felt inside. It's almost like you felt beautiful or the beauty is inside of you.
Yes, and so that's how when you talk about challenging times or times that are feel very oppressive and difficult and trapped, you can just it's just being able to regain that sense of possibility and magic is, again, I keep calling it nurturing, like almost like as necessary as food, and also transformative, like that you can see as many times as it happens. And there's been times where I'm like, well, that's gone now, I'll never get that back. And I've had droughts, like artistic droughts, where whatever I try and do, I just can't seem to get it. But patience and also application of trying different things, and then it just aligns up again and I can enter again. And that, to me, I keep saying it has saved my life. That has absolutely given me fortitude to carry on, curiosity about what the next day will bring. So for instance, if I have curiosity about um, uh, being by the water and how is the water going to look today or tomorrow, I assume it's going to look the same, but when I actually get there, it's not the same. It's something different. The sun is reflecting this way or that way, and I've got that with my camera. Like we will vibe together. I will be absorbed in this gorgeousness and I will feel replenished, almost like I've had a good meal. Like,
Yeah.
so it's the same thing with writing something that just feels connected. And so let's say like I went visual movement. It could be through writing. It could be through some kind of spontaneous creation. It could be through photographing or video with your phone. It could be through a collective or a community that you tap into, or it can be through your own prompting and reflection. There's so many ways. Again,
So
art is very abundant.
yeah, you've just shared like amazing tips, right? And so as you share these tips, it It makes me think, so if I was in a difficult situation, and there's all of these different possibilities available to me, like what would you tell someone? Like how would someone get started? How do I know which medium to start with? And like what would you recommend someone who's not
Yeah,
feeling
I
well, who's and needs to get to shift?
that so again, that I feel like that can be very individual, and it might be trial and error. And I've talked about periods of drought. So I've had periods of drought where I'm like, no writing is coming. It's not a writing era right now. No writing is coming. I don't have inspiration. So in that case, I might do something very small and just take a concept and just try and represent it symbolically through just like a crayon drawing or gathering found materials. And I'll be like 2 minutes. The concept is the concept might even be a question of like where do I go with my art? And so I might try and draw that out, or I might come at it through a journal. Like, you might just start really small. Sometimes also, I haven't talked about this, but sometimes it's an internal process. So you might walk yourself through. If it's hard to get imagination out, I would suggest going in. And I haven't talked about this too much, but when I had my head injury and I was not actually physically capable of some of these other artful forms, I went interior and I built within my mind a whole world that I traversed. So I would be like, okay, so I want to be more artful. Let's go inside and see, like, where am I? Oh, I've built myself a little house by the water. What am I doing every day? I'm going to go explore the shoreline. Where does the shoreline go? So I'm now doing a curiosity exploration in my mind, which is priming it to maybe come outward. And then maybe that turns, then you're like, oh, then there's a spark that often usually comes somewhere where you're like, oh, the tree that I just visited in my mind is now talking to me and I'm writing a poem about this tree. Like, it's hard to say where things will come because it's unpredictable. So you could go interior, you could start with you could start just by also playing with mediums. You could put on a song and just get your body flowing. You could go to a place that's important to you. You could go to a place that's important to you in your memory and just like craft it again. Like describe it for yourself, even just getting into words that help you generate an imaginative location is again priming you. So you're now appealing to color, you're now appealing to shape, you're now appealing to, you know, uh, a vibe of a place. So you're getting yourself into that mode. Or you could just straight up be like, I'm going to join a photography club. Like you could just look online. You could start following artists that you admire through social media and see what they're up to because there's a lot of really inspiring things. Sometimes I find that overwhelming and I'm like, I'll never be as good as them. And you can start putting yourself down. So then go into some of those smaller pieces or take your phone out, go for a photo walk. You've walked this way to the store or work or whatever, or to your car or bus stop. How many times? What did you really see? So this time, take your phone out. Oh, you're just going to look at what is growing through the cracks. Maybe they have an interesting design and that design sparks something. So it's hard to know where a creative spark is going to come for a person. It can come from so many places. But
Yeah.
I would just be free to go and play, whether it's internal, external, through this medium, through that medium. Some people know that they are writers and that's their method. So maybe you're like, okay, I need to take an extra step. I need to look at the local library. Do they have a writing club? So it could be through community, it could be through your own interiority, it could be through your ecology, inner and outer, it could be through so many ways. So, but I would just start pulling a thread somewhere because a thread leads to another thread leads to another thread. And it's the
Mhm.
feeling you're going for too. So the inquiry and the curiosity is kind of what propels you forward towards more and more things.
Yeah, I love how you gave examples of many, many different forms, from writing to walking to being in discovery of the environment to and being open to what is the world going to show me, and letting that magic percolate. So curiosity being key. And, in terms of where to start is really tapping into where are you feeling inspired, and just one step will lead to another step and another step. And you gave a variety of different methods, which you call art, but I really see it as a creative expression or a creative discovery. It's really working with a different language that we tend to be used to, with words and language, the language of words and form.
Yeah,
So I'm very it's wonderful to hear you speak, and I really feel the inspiration flowing through you even as you share. So, is there one bit of um, inspiration or thing that you would advise anyone in this moment as the whole world is shifting?
um, well, I also see art as a form of activism because you are not to discount that despair or sadness or grief. Those are things that need to be felt, but they can also be expressed in art, and which gives you a channel for so things don't stagnate. So if those feelings are there, because you like I keep talking about this joyful experience, and people might be like, well, I just cannot tap into joy. And I'm like, that's a kind of a result, perhaps. But I've also in very moments of grief, and I've called it oppression or stuckness, been able to find, I've called it pulling a thread, that the threads are still there, possibility is still there, and you can just it's there, it's still there. So to me, to my mind, that is the regenerative aspect of kind of like continuing or sustaining or keeping going or staying curious about life, and knowing that there is always possibilities. This is where I feel like art saved my life. I feel like art is a form of activism, whether it comes through internal transformation or it becomes a collective endeavor. It usually shifts the energy of a person or a space, just because of the way it allows for reinterpretation of experience.
I love that reinterpretation
Yeah, it
of an
allows for a
experience.
reinterpretation for those who are also may not be so you may be making the art and putting it out there, but sometimes it's very personal and you're the only audience, and that's also good because you are going to then be the interpreter of your art as well. But then you are also demonstrating to others this capacity, that this is available. And also like broadening the idea of art. It isn't just for a particular type. You don't have to have a particular skill level. It is a state of mind. It is a right. So it's not the perfectionism or this idea that you need to sell it. Like that's for later discussions, right? Like that's for another time. That's for select pieces. That is may not even be the point. The point is the energetic shift. And I just feel that is so, we just remember that it's there. And sometimes when people make art, that is that is enough of the message to help somebody, is that they see that there is still somebody still has the capacity to make that for others. And so that is like inspiring to other people to see that, and may also generate a spark within themselves. So that, yeah, the whole, yes, don't lose sight of creative potential. Don't lose sight of the feeling it can and have in you, and the sense of transcendence it can bring individually and collectively, small scale, large scale. It's just so powerful.
Wonderful. Thank you so much for sharing this. It's super inspiring. It gives perspective as to what's possible. And a couple of things that you said was, really being with the emotion and expressing it through art, reinterpretation of an experience. And art is not perfection. It's not something that needs to look a certain way. It's a state of mind, and it's a medium to allow the energies to shift, and so powerful, so powerful. So where can people find out more about your work or connect with you?
The best place right now would be on Instagram. That's where you're gonna find all my nature, well, all the I call it co-creation because I believe that the ecology I'm in is responding to my camera and we are making things together. But it's at Julie Johnson's, and there's three E's and three N's. So JULIEEE Johnson, JOHNSONNN. And that links to a page which links to some of my other creations, which happens to be called Julie Johnson is Creative at WordPress.com. And I've got some links there to the books that I've made, some of the stories that have been published. And I also have so much more than that percolating behind the scenes. But that's probably a good place to get started to see some of that. Some of the stuff we're talking about has been in the back of my mind to turn into, like, I don't know, some co-created experiences. I used to run things called creative labs where we would play with concepts and online and stuff. And I haven't done that in a while, but so there's some things in my future. So just keep an eye on my page.
Yeah, so what would you say is next for you?
I just keep telling the universe, please bring me more experiences of art, explore. I'd like to get back exploring performance, whether that's through dance, whether it's through acting, whether it's through film, creative film pieces. But I live daily. I'd like to live daily as much as possible in this area. So photography is still very much in my life, but I'm just like all the arts, and then as much collaboration and community within those art spaces also, because I've done a lot of it alone, and I would just love to get back. And this has started to shape up for me to get back into communal spaces and talking, like even just talking about this is energizing and making me wanted to go do that, which I hope it is for whoever is watching or listening to this. So, and then all of a sudden, again, your energy, the excitement comes back into life, right? You get the curiosity of, and the potential comes back. So I'm feeling it as I'm saying it. So I'm like, oh, something today, something, anything, right? Just build it into daily life. So for me, that's some of what's next. Just continuing that, and then I'd like to explore areas that I haven't explored that much before, and also maybe find more communities to collaborate with in doing that.
Wonderful, wonderful. Well, I look forward to seeing what you're up to in your collaboration. And
Thank you.
thank you so much for sharing this creative life that you're living.
Oh, it is so, I again feel it's just how I tap into a sense of abundance and beauty. And I just love it so much. So I'm so glad you invited me on to talk about it. And again, like this is like time flows by, even talking about this, a state of flow, just the excitement of even just referencing some of these things. It was a good reminder for me. Good reminder for me. So thank you.
Thank you so much.